What if the man who vowed to love you only married you to break you? What if every gentle word, every stolen glance, was part of a plan for revenge? Ethan Caldwell had everything: power, wealth, and a mansion of glass that touched the Seattle sky. But behind those walls, his heart was a battlefield, haunted by one promise to destroy the man who ruined his father. And his weapon of choice was that man's daughter. Claire Whitmore was bright, kind, and full of quiet dreams until the day she was forced into a marriage built on lies. Yet, inside that cold house of silence, something unexpected began to grow: empathy, music, and the fragile spark of love between two souls trapped by pain. Can hatred truly turn into love? Can a heart built on vengeance ever learn to forgive? And when the truth comes out, will love be enough to save them both? Stay with us through this powerful journey of betrayal, redemption, and the healing strength of forgiveness. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where every tale reminds us that even broken hearts can find their light again. Seattle, a city of lights and rain, the kind of rain that whispers rather than falls, tracing silver threads down walls of glass. At the top of the Caldwell Tower, where the night air hums against floor-to-ceiling windows, Ethan Caldwell stood alone. His reflection stared back at him: sharp suit, gray eyes, a face too young to look so tired. Behind him stretched the kingdom he had built: miles of real estate, hotels, and towers that bore his name in steel and stone. Success. It was supposed to mean something. But standing there, surrounded by silence and glass, Ethan felt only the weight of everything it had cost. He could almost hear his father's voice again, gentle, measured, filled with faith. Buildings can touch the sky, sun, but it's the hands that build them that matter most. That voice had been gone for 18 years. Robert Whitmore had silenced it. Ethan closed his eyes. Memory came like the echo of a hammer. The day of his father's funeral, the scent of rain on cedar, the disbelief on his mother's face as she stood beside a coffin she couldn't afford to bury. Thomas Caldwell, architect, dreamer, betrayed by his own partner Robert Whitmore, the man who had stolen his designs, ruined his name, and left him with nothing but shame. Ethan had been 17 then, a boy old enough to understand deceit, too young to stop it. That was the day he made a promise over a handful of wet soil. He would build an empire so vast that no one could ever destroy him again. And when he did, he would make Robert Whitmore pay for every brick of that grave. Now, at 35, he had done it. Caldwell properties stretched from Seattle to San Francisco. His fortune was measured in billions. His reputation ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. And yet, Ethan's reflection in the window seemed hollow, like a tower of glass built without a foundation. He poured himself a drink scotch, neat, and watched the amber swirl in the crystal tumbler. It caught the light like fire trapped in ice. He thought about how his father used to take his coffee black. Never liquor, a clear head builds a steady hand, he used to say. Ethan smiled faintly, though it wasn't joy. On the credenza behind him lay a folder, thick, cream-colored. Inside were the numbers, the debts, the evidence. Whitmore Designs was collapsing millions in unpaid loans, lawsuits, tax liens, every line of it meticulously arranged by Ethan's own legal team. Every pressure point applied quietly over 2 years. Whitmore didn't know yet that Ethan Caldwell was the hand behind the ruin, but he would soon. And when the old man came crawling, because men like him always did, Ethan would be waiting. He took another sip of scotch, feeling the burn slide down his throat. Revenge wasn't loud. It was patient, precise. It was a kind of architecture. The elevator chimed softly behind him. Leonard, his assistant, stepped in with a tablet and a cautious voice. "Mr. Caldwell, the Hong Kong investors confirmed for Thursday, and there's a message from Robert Whitmore's office." Ethan didn't turn. Read it. He's asking for a meeting. Urgent. Says it concerns his company's restructuring. Ethan let the silence stretch. The hum of the city filled the room, low and endless. "Finally," he said. "Tell him to come tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Leonard hesitated. "Should I prepare the usual briefing?" "No. Just make sure he waits 15 minutes before I see him." The assistant nodded, uneasy. Everyone in the building knew that when Ethan smiled that way, soft, detached, someone was about to lose everything. When the elevator doors closed again, Ethan turned back to the city. Rain was falling harder now, streaking the windows with lines that looked like tears. He remembered how his mother used to wipe rain from her cheeks after his father's death, pretending it wasn't grief. She had died 3 winters later, her heart worn out by years of struggle. There had been no one left to tell Ethan that revenge was poison disguised as purpose. He had built towers instead of relationships, contracts instead of connections. And now, when people spoke his name, it was with respect laced with fear. Some nights, he wondered if his father would even recognize him, but that thought never lasted long. He didn't have time for sentiment. He had a promise to keep. Ethan set his glass down and straightened his tie. Outside, lightning flashed a white vein splitting the clouds, and for a moment, his reflection merged with the storm. Tomorrow, Robert Whitmore would walk through his doors. Tomorrow, the past would bow before him. And yet, somewhere deep within, a small, uninvited question stirred. When it's over, what then? He ignored it. There would be time for questions later. For now, there was only the plan, the empire, the glass. He turned off the lights, leaving only the city's reflection to burn across the window. Seattle shimmered beneath him, cold, brilliant, and distant. Ethan Caldwell's mouth curved into a faint smile. It wasn't joy, it was anticipation. Tomorrow, the man who had destroyed his father would come begging for mercy, and Ethan intended to enjoy every second of it. The next morning broke gray over Seattle, a thin drizzle painting the streets below Caldwell Tower. Ethan arrived early, as he always did. He liked the quiet before the world began its noise. His office was all clean lines and glass, no warmth, no color, just reflections of power. At precisely 9 o'clock, Leonard's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Caldwell, Robert Whitmore is here." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He wanted the man to wait. He wanted him to feel small. "Make him sit," he said finally. 15 minutes. 15 minutes could stretch forever when your life was collapsing. Ethan reviewed the financial file one last time. Whitmore Designs was bleeding money over due loans, canceled contracts, pending lawsuits. Every number was a nail in the coffin. Ethan had driven them all in himself. When Leonard appeared again, he looked uneasy. "Sir, he looks bad." Ethan's voice was calm. "Send him in." The door opened. Robert Whitmore stepped inside. For a moment, Ethan barely recognized the man he had once feared as a boy, the man who had destroyed his father's life. Whitmore's hair was white now, his skin sallow. His suit hung loose on his shoulders. His eyes carried the hollow panic of a man drowning. "Mr. Caldwell," Robert began, voice rough. "Thank you for seeing me." Ethan gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." The words were polite, but his tone was not. Robert sat, clutching his briefcase as though it could protect him. "You must know why I'm here. My firm, my family were on the edge. The banks have frozen our accounts. I'm running out of options." Ethan leaned back, hands folded, expression unreadable. "And you came to me?" Robert nodded. "I was told you might be willing to invest. To help restructure, I can offer equity, patents, anything." Ethan studied him for a long, slow moment. It was almost clinical the way a surgeon studies a patient before making the first incision. "Tell me," he said finally, "what happened to all that confidence you used to have? I remember reading interviews where you called yourself the architect of integrity." Whitmore's face flushed. "I was younger then." "Yes," Ethan said quietly. So was my father. The air thickened. The hum of the rain outside was the only sound between them. Robert's eyes darted up. Your father, Thomas Caldwell. I never wanted things to end that way. He was brilliant. I've regretted regret, Ethan cut in, is the luxury of men who survive what they destroy. Robert flinched. If you've come to lecture me? No, Ethan said. His voice softened, almost conversational. I've come to make you an offer? Robert blinked. An offer? Yes. Ethan opened the folder, turned it around, and slid it across the desk. That's your company's debt profile. I can erase every cent, restructure your firm, save your reputation, in one condition. Robert leaned forward, desperate. Anything. Just tell me what you want. Ethan looked directly into his eyes. His voice was calm. Too calm. I want your daughter, Claire, for a heartbeat. Robert didn't understand. What your daughter? Ethan repeated. Claire Whitmore, 26, art history graduate from Boston. She volunteers at the State Museum on weekends. She's beautiful. I've done my research. Robert's mouth opened, but no words came. Ethan continued, almost gently. You'll arrange a marriage between us. 2 weeks from now? The older man shook his head, disbelieving. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. Claire has nothing to do with this. Robert's voice cracked, rising. Ethan's tone didn't change. On the contrary, she's the only thing left of you that hasn't collapsed. Robert stood, trembling. You're talking about my daughter like she's a bargaining chip. That's exactly what she is, Ethan said, still seated, still calm. A very valuable one. Robert's voice broke. She just finished school. She has plans, a future. You'd destroy her life. Ethan looked up, eyes cold as the rain. You destroyed my father's. You'll forgive me if I find the symmetry poetic. The silence that followed was unbearable. Outside, thunder rolled low over the bay. Robert sank back into his chair. His hands trembled against his knees. You wouldn't really, Ethan leaned forward. I would, and I will, because I hold evidence that would put you in federal prison for fraud and tax evasion. You doctored your ledgers, used shell companies to hide embezzled funds from your partnership with Thomas Caldwell. I have it all. Robert's color drained away. How could you? I learned from the best, Ethan said softly. From you. For a long while, neither spoke. Rain drummed against the glass like a heartbeat. Finally, Robert whispered. Please, don't do this. Ethan tilted his head, considering. There's still a choice. Marry your daughter to me, and I'll make your problems disappear. Or refuse, and you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars, wondering how she'll pay for your wife's medical bills. That last line hit like a blade. Ethan saw it in Robert's eyes. The fear, the love, the helplessness. Evelyn Whitmore's cancer treatments were expensive. Without money, she would die. Ethan didn't blink. He let the silence work. When Robert finally spoke, his voice was no louder than the rain. You'd use her to hurt me. Yes, Ethan said. You understand perfectly. Robert's hands covered his face. The sound that escaped him was somewhere between a sob and a sigh. God help me. Ethan stood, walking to the window. God had his chance 18 years ago. He turned back, his reflection fractured across the glass. Now, the choice is yours. Robert sat motionless for several seconds. Then, slowly, he rose. His shoulders, once straight with pride, were bent. His voice was nearly gone. When does this arrangement begin? Ethan's lips curved into that faint, terrible smile. I'll send my lawyers to your office. The wedding will take place in 2 weeks. Robert nodded once, his movements mechanical, as if the air itself had turned too heavy to breathe. He reached for his briefcase but didn't open it. There was nothing left inside worth offering. At the door, He paused. You think this will bring you peace? Ethan's gaze was unreadable. No, he said, but it will bring me justice. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Ethan stood alone again, the echo of that sound lingering. Outside, lightning flashed against the city's mirrored skyline. He picked up his glass of scotch, untouched since last night. It tasted bitter now, almost like guilt. He set it down and whispered, to no one in particular, justice, or something like it. Boston smelled of rain and old books that morning. Claire Whitmore sat at her favorite corner table inside the university library, surrounded by stacks of art history journals. The soft hum of fluorescent lights and the rustle of turning pages were her kind of music. Her world was quiet, predictable, gentle. She loved the texture of paper beneath her fingers, the calm order of centuries-old paintings, the way light filtered through dust like a memory. She dreamed sometimes of working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, of standing before masterpieces and explaining to strangers why beauty mattered, why art was the only proof that humanity could still create something pure. She had never been rich, but she had been happy, or at least she thought she was. That was before the phone call, before her father's voice broke through the static, shaking like a man who had lost everything. When Claire stepped off the train that afternoon, the Boston sky had darkened, clouds heavy with the promise of rain. Their townhouse stood on a narrow street lined with maples just starting to turn. It should have been beautiful, but the moment she saw her father waiting on the porch, she knew something was terribly wrong. Dad, she called softly. Robert Whitmore looked smaller than she remembered. His shoulders were hunched, his suit wrinkled, his eyes red. He didn't answer right away. He just opened the door and gestured her inside. Evelyn, her mother, was asleep on the living room couch, a knitted blanket pulled up to her chin. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Beside her, an IV bag hung from a metal stand, the slow drip echoing the ticking of the clock. Claire's throat tightened. She's resting, her father said quickly. The treatments, they're taking everything out of her. He motioned for Claire to follow him into his study. The room smelled of dust and regret. Architectural sketches covered the walls, dreams half-finished and abandoned. Sit down, sweetheart, Robert said. His voice cracked. I need to tell you something. Claire sat. Her hands were cold. I've made mistakes, he began. Bad ones. I thought I could fix them before anyone found out. But I can't. What kind of mistakes? Her father rubbed a trembling hand across his face. Financial? Legal? The company's failing. The banks. He swallowed hard. They're calling in every loan. And there's a man, Ethan Caldwell. He owns most of the debt. He's offered to save us, but he couldn't finish. The silence that followed was thick with something unspoken and terrible. Dad, Claire whispered, but what Robert's eyes filled with tears. He wants you, Claire. He wants you to marry him. The words didn't make sense at first. Marry him. It sounded like something from a cruel story, not real life. She stared at her father, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke. He didn't. Her chest felt tight. You mean a business arrangement? He nodded miserably. He said it's the only way. If you agree, he'll save everything, the company, the house, your mother's treatments. If you don't, he looked away. We lose everything. Claire's heart pounded. The edges of the room blurred. This man, she said softly. Who is he? Ethan Caldwell, her father said. He's Thomas Caldwell's son. That name struck like lightning through her chest. Even she had heard of the Caldwell family, famous architects once, until scandal had destroyed them years ago. Claire stood, backing away as if distance could make it less real. He wants to marry me to punish you. Her father nodded slowly. I believe so. She felt sick. Her mother's soft breathing drifted from the next room, steady but fragile. The IV line glinted in the lamplight. Her father's hands trembled as he spoke again. Claire, I'm so sorry. If there were another way. There's always another way, she said sharply. then stopped. No, there wasn't. Not for them, not anymore. Her father's voice broke. If you refuse, I'll go to prison. Your mother's treatments will stop. The insurance won't cover it. She won't survive the year. Tears burned in Claire's eyes. She sank into the nearest chair. The rain outside had started to fall harder, tapping against the window like an impatient hand. She thought of her mother's gentle laugh, the smell of her perfume, the way she hummed when she cooked. She thought of the art she loved, the soft brushstrokes of Monet, the fragile light of Vermeer. How could a world that created such beauty also demand such cruelty? Hours passed. The house grew dim. Her father waited in silence, afraid to hope. Claire sat by the window, her face turned toward the storm. The city lights blurred behind the rain. In her mind, she argued with herself. This isn't your fault, but it's your responsibility. You didn't cause this, but you can end it. She thought of her mother's hand resting weakly in hers, the way she used to whisper, "You have your father's strength, but my heart. Use both wisely. Duty, love, sacrifice." Some words were too old to fight. When she finally stood, her voice was steady, though her heart was breaking. "Where is he?" she asked. Her father looked up, startled. "Who Ethan Caldwell?" I don't know. His office will contact us tomorrow." Claire nodded once. She crossed the room and placed a trembling hand on her father's shoulder. "Then call them," she said. "Tell him I agree." Robert's eyes filled with tears. "Claire, don't," she said quietly. "Just don't say anything. You made a mistake. I'll fix it." She turned toward the window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang the hour. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "If it must be me, then so be it." The wedding took less than 12 minutes. No music, no flowers, just the echo of rain against courthouse glass. The judge's voice droned through legal vows that neither of them believed in. Claire's hand trembled once as she signed the papers, the thin gold band already heavy on her finger. Ethan's signature followed swift, practiced, without hesitation. There were no guests, no family photographs. Only Leonard, who stood discreetly by the door, holding a folder that might as well have contained a business merger. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan only nodded politely, as if acknowledging a transaction completed. He leaned in, brushed her lips once, and stepped back before she could even close her eyes. The kiss left no warmth, only the faint taste of finality. Outside, the drizzle had turned into steady rain. Ethan offered his umbrella as they walked toward the waiting car, but Claire shook her head. She didn't want to share its shelter. The gray sky suited her mood. He didn't insist. He never did. The car ride was silent except for the rhythmic slap of the wipers. Seattle's skyline blurred behind the rain, tall glass towers glowing like distant stars. Claire watched the reflection of her face in the window, a stranger's face. At 26, she was married to a man she barely knew, bound to him by her father's sins. When the car turned into a private drive, she caught her first glimpse of the Caldwell estate. The mansion stood at the edge of Lake Washington, all steel and glass, its sharp lines cutting through the mist. It was breathtaking beautiful, in the same way a museum was beautiful perfect, expensive, and lifeless. A woman in her 50s met them at the door. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said softly. "I'm Martha Lang, housekeeper. Welcome, Mrs. Caldwell." The words landed like a stone in Claire's chest. Martha's smile was kind, but her eyes studied the young woman carefully, as though sensing the truth this wasn't a love story. It was a sentence. Inside, the mansion gleamed with silence. Polished marble floors reflected the chandelier light. Artwork hung precisely on the walls, chosen for symmetry, not soul. "This way, ma'am," Martha said gently. She led Claire down a long hallway lined with tall windows. Beyond the glass, The lake shimmered dark under the rain. "This is your suite," Martha continued, opening double doors to a room that looked like something out of a magazine. Soft gray walls, silk drapes, a fireplace that flickered automatically when she entered. Everything perfect. Everything wrong. Mr. Caldwell's quarters are in the west wing, Martha added carefully. He prefers his privacy. Your meals will be served here unless he requests your company. Claire nodded numbly. Thank you. When Martha left, the room felt too large. The fire crackled softly, pretending at warmth. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her simple cream dress. Her hands were cold. The gold ring glinted under the firelight. Across the mansion, Ethan stood by his own window, whiskey untouched on the desk. From there he could see her balcony light glowing faintly behind the curtains. He told himself he didn't care, that this was victory, not vulnerability. But the sight of that soft glow unsettled him. He remembered her face in the courthouse, pale, composed, heartbreak hidden beneath politeness. When she said her vows, her voice didn't break, but her eyes had looked like someone walking into a storm. She looks like innocence wearing a chain, he muttered under his breath. He hated that the words came out softer than intended. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction, a reckoning. He'd expected anger, even resistance. But her quiet dignity, her stillness had disarmed him in ways he couldn't name. He turned away, trying to bury the thought under paperwork and pride. In her suite, Claire unpacked slowly, as though moving underwater. Each folded dress, each book, each photograph was a reminder of a life she had not chosen to leave behind. She placed a picture of her parents on the nightstand, her mother smiling in a garden, her father, years younger, unburdened. She stared at it until her vision blurred. Then the tears came silent, uncontrollable, relentless. Not the tears of a frightened girl, but of a woman who knew the cost of sacrifice. She wept for her mother's illness, her father's shame, her own stolen freedom. She wept because love was supposed to feel like safety, not like surrender. The rain outside echoed her grief, steady and endless. When she finally looked up, her reflection in the window was streaked with tears. For a moment, she imagined her father's voice calling her name. Then she remembered this was what saving him looked like. Hours passed. Dinner came and went, untouched. At 10, Martha knocked softly. "Can I bring you anything?" "Dear, no. Thank you," Claire said, wiping her face quickly. "Would you like me to tell Mr. Caldwell you're settled?" "No," she whispered. "Please don't." Martha hesitated, studying her face. There was something maternal in her eyes, a flicker of pity. "All right then, try to rest. It's been a long day." When the door closed, Claire lay back on the bed, eyes open to the ceiling. She wondered what he was doing at that moment. Did he feel even a fraction of what she did? No, he couldn't. His heart was iron. His soul, she told herself, was frozen long ago. But somewhere across the house, Ethan was still awake, standing in front of his own window. Neither of them slept that night. He watched the storm. She listened to it, each trapped in silence of their own making. At midnight, Ethan loosened his tie, staring at the reflection of the rain against the glass. He had wanted this day for 15 years, had imagined it, designed it, down to the smallest cruelty. And yet, there was no satisfaction in it, only the faintest ache, like the echo of a wound that refused to close. He set the whiskey glass down and turned away. Tomorrow would bring the next step, the next move, the plan. For now, the mansion remained quiet, too quiet. Rain whispered against the windows, a lullaby for two strangers bound by revenge. And somewhere in that silence, two hearts beat distant, uneasy, already beginning to change. Morning came softly over Lake Washington. Mist hovered on the water, blurring the line between lake and sky. Inside the Caldwell mansion, the air was still so quiet that the hum of the refrigerator sounded like distant thunder. Ethan was gone before dawn, as always. His car pulled away without sound, leaving nothing behind but the echo of his schedule. Claire heard it from her room, half awake, the faint click of the front door closing. Another day beginning without words. Breakfast arrived on a silver tray, fresh fruit, coffee, and a note written in Martha's looping hand. "Eat something, dear. You need strength to build new routines." Claire smiled faintly but didn't eat. The fruit looked too bright, too alive for the way she felt. By mid-morning, the house settled into its usual rhythm, silence wrapped in luxury. She wandered through long hallways where her footsteps barely made a sound on the polished marble. Every surface gleamed, every corner perfect, yet the perfection pressed against her like glass too close to the skin. She paused in the gallery. Photographs of buildings lined the walls. Ethan's towers, his conquests, steel, symmetry, control, no faces, not one. The emptiness of them told her more about her husband than words ever could. Martha found her in the kitchen later that afternoon, staring out at the rain. "You'll turn into one of those statues if you stand there much longer," the older woman said gently. Claire turned, startled, then laughed a little. "Maybe that wouldn't be so bad." "Oh, it would," Martha replied, pouring tea into 2 cups. "Statues don't get to start over." They sat together at the long oak table. Martha's presence filled the silence like sunlight slipping through curtains. She spoke in that soft, practical way of women who had seen too much and learned when to say nothing. "I've worked here since Mr. Caldwell's father was alive," she said after a moment. "Back then this house wasn't all glass and echo. It used to smell of cedar and fresh paint. The young Ethan used to run through the halls barefoot, leaving muddy prints on the floor. His father never scolded him. Said a house should have proof that someone's living in it." Claire listened quietly, the tea cooling in her hands. "What happened to him?" she asked. Martha sighed. "Grief has a way of hollowing people out. Dear, some fill the emptiness with faith, others with anger. Ethan built walls instead, beautiful ones, high enough that no one could reach him." The housekeeper looked toward the window, eyes distant. He wasn't always this cold. Claire didn't answer, but later, as she walked past those endless walls of glass, she found herself wondering what kind of boy he had been before the world hardened him. It was near dusk when she found the piano room. She hadn't meant to. The door was half open, dust motes floating in a shaft of fading light. The room smelled faintly of polish and time. A black grand piano stood near the window, its surface veiled in a thin layer of dust, like something forgotten. Claire touched one key. It answered with a soft, uncertain note, lonely, but still alive. She sat down, brushing her fingers across the keyboard. The first chords came slowly, hesitant, as if asking permission. Then muscle memory took over. The melody of a Chopin nocturne filled the air, fragile, mournful. The sound of longing given shape. The music drifted through the corridor, climbing the staircase, slipping beneath the doors of empty rooms. For the first time, the house breathed. Ethan returned home just after 9. He was tired, the kind of tired that money couldn't soothe. Contracts, calls, another building deal. None of it mattered the way it once had. Lately, victory left a strange taste, metallic, bitter. He was halfway down the hall when he heard it. Music, soft, slow, haunting. Notes rising and falling like the rhythm of rain. He stopped. For a moment he thought it must be a recording. No one had touched that piano in years. His father had played once, before everything fell apart. Since then, the instrument had become another relic, something he couldn't bear to hear. Ethan followed the sound. The closer he came, the more the melody filled him with something he didn't recognize. Not anger, not triumph, something gentler, dangerous in its gentleness. He paused at the doorway. Claire sat with her back to him, hair falling in loose waves down her shoulders. Her hands moved with quiet grace, shaping the air into harmony. The lamplight caught the curve of her face, the faint shimmer of tears she hadn't noticed. Ethan stayed in the shadows, afraid to break the spell. When she reached the final note, the silence that followed was almost holy. She exhaled slowly, as if waking from a dream. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. Instead, he turned away and walked back down the hall, his footsteps noiseless on the marble. In her room later that night, Claire wondered if she'd imagined it, the feeling that someone had been listening. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the music in her mind. The melody had felt like confession, though she didn't know what she was confessing to. Across the mansion, Ethan stood once more by the window, the lake glimmering under a pale moon. The echo of her playing lingered in him, unsettling, uninvited. For 15 years, he had filled silence with ambition. Tonight, the silence felt different, softer, alive. He whispered to the empty room, "You shouldn't have played that, Claire." But even as he said it, a faint smile crossed his face. The next morning, Martha noticed something small but remarkable. When she brought Claire breakfast, the piano door was wide open, and for the first time since she'd worked there, she heard humming in the hallway. The house of glass, once silent as stone, had begun to remember what warmth felt like. The nights began to follow a rhythm of their own. After dinner, the mansion would fall silent. The lake outside mirrored the moon like polished glass, and the air filled with the scent of rain drifting through the half-open windows. And then, almost always, the piano would begin. At first, it was tentative, a few uncertain notes, like a shy voice learning to speak again. Then, gradually, confidence grew. Melodies from another world. Bach, Debussy. Sometimes a piece that sounded like her own creation. Soft, searching, beautiful. Ethan never entered the room. He stayed in the hallway, just beyond the pool of light spilling from the half-open door. Sometimes he leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets, eyes closed. He told himself it was curiosity that kept him there, but the truth felt heavier. Her music unsettled him. It reminded him of what his father used to say, that architecture was just frozen music, and music was architecture that breathed. Every night, those notes melted something in him he didn't want to thaw. Claire never knew he was there, or perhaps she did. There were nights when her hands slowed, her head tilted slightly as though she felt eyes on her, but she never turned around. For her, the piano was the only way to release everything she couldn't say out loud. The fear, the grief, the strange, fragile hope that maybe, beneath all the coldness, her husband wasn't entirely made of stone. Each song became a letter she could never send. One night, as the clock struck 11, the melody faltered. Her fingers lingered above the keys. The silence that followed was delicate, expectant. From the doorway came a voice, quiet, steady, and unfamiliar in its warmth. "You play beautifully." Claire froze. For weeks, she had imagined that voice behind her, but hearing it now made her pulse quicken. Slowly, she turned. Ethan stood in the doorway. No tie, no armor of business. Just a man in shirt sleeves, shadowed by the soft glow of the lamp. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said. She shook her head, unsure what to say. "You're not interrupting. I didn't know you listened." He stepped closer, just enough that the lamplight brushed his face. Every night, her eyes widened slightly. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because it's been a long time since this house sounded alive." The words caught her off guard. For the first time, she heard something human in his tone, something she couldn't name. She looked down at the keys. "Music helps me breathe," she said softly. "When everything feels too heavy, I play until it doesn't." Ethan nodded slowly, his voice gentler now. "My father used to say the same thing." There was a pause, and then, as if afraid of breaking the fragile peace, Claire asked, "You miss him?" Ethan's jaw tightened. Every day. The silence between them deepened, but not with tension. With understanding, Claire said quietly, "I'm sorry." He almost smiled, a sad curve of the lips. "Don't be... He's the reason I am who I am." She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "That's not always a good thing." He met her eyes and for once didn't look away. They spoke for the first time not as strangers, but as two people who had been carrying their grief alone for far too long. Ethan found himself asking questions he hadn't planned to, about her life in Boston, her love of art, the way she saw beauty in things most people ignored. When she talked about the smell of old libraries and how a painting could change the temperature of a room, he listened not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Her voice was soft, deliberate, every word shaped with care. She reminded him of calm mornings before the world had gone wrong. Then she mentioned her mother. "How is she?" he asked quietly. Claire's hand stilled on the keys. "Some days are better," she said. "Most aren't. The treatments help, but they take a lot from her." Her voice broke a little. "I don't know how much time we have left." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, but words failed. Instead, he took a step closer. The distance between them shrank to a few feet. "I can make sure she gets the best care," he said finally. Claire looked up. "You already are. I know about the hospital bills." He frowned. "Your father told you." She shook her head. "I saw the statements. They're being paid through one of your companies." Ethan said nothing. He didn't know what to do with gratitude. "I may hate this arrangement," Claire continued softly, "but I'm grateful for that." Her eyes met his. In them, he saw no manipulation, no pretense, only sincerity. Something inside him shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but something close. The silence stretched again. The air between them felt fragile, shimmering. Then Claire turned back to the piano. "Would you like to hear another piece?" Ethan hesitated. "If you don't mind." "I don't." She placed her hands on the keys. "This one's my mother's favorite." The melody that followed was simple, slow, tender, almost like a lullaby. He closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. For a brief moment, he imagined a different version of himself, one who could sit beside her, not as a captor or a stranger, but as a man who remembered what gentleness felt like. When the last note faded, Claire didn't move. Neither did he. It was Martha's voice, faintly calling from the hallway. That broke the spell. "Good night, Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Caldwell." Ethan straightened. "Good night, Martha," he replied, his tone unusually soft. Then to Claire, "You should rest." She nodded. "Good night, Ethan." It was the first time she had said his name. Later, in his study, he poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. The sound of her piano lingered in his mind, every note unraveling something he'd tried for years to keep bound. He realized then that the house was no longer silent, and neither was he. The invitation came folded inside a thick white envelope embossed with silver ink. A charity gala hosted by the Seattle Cultural Foundation, one of Ethan's many circles of influence. He left it on the breakfast table without comment. Claire found it beside her untouched coffee cup the next morning. Beneath it, a short note in his handwriting. "We'll attend together. Friday at 7. A car will pick you up at 6:30. No greeting, no explanation, just instruction." She stared at it for a long moment before folding it neatly and setting it aside. She'd learned not to argue with decisions already made. 2 days later, a package arrived at her suite. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper the color of mint and snow, was a gown, emerald silk, smooth as water, shimmering when it caught the light. Alongside it lay a small velvet box containing diamond earrings. Simple but stunning. A note attached read, "Appropriate attire for the event. No name." Though she recognized his handwriting again, the same restrained, elegant strokes. Claire ran her fingers across the fabric. It was beautiful, but it felt like a costume. Still, when the evening came, she slipped into it. The silk whispered against her skin. Cool at first, then warm as it settled around her. The dress hugged her waist, draped gracefully at her shoulders, its deep green bringing out the gold in her brown eyes. For the first time since she'd entered this house, she looked in the mirror and didn't see a prisoner. She saw a woman. Perhaps that was why she didn't notice Ethan at first when she descended the staircase. He was waiting in the foyer, already dressed in black tie, a dark suit perfectly tailored, his posture as precise as the architecture he designed. But when he looked up and saw her, something flickered across his face, a sharp intake of breath, a tightening at the jaw, a glance that lingered 1 second too long. "You look—" He stopped himself. Then, more quietly, "exceptional." "Thank you," she said, her tone polite. He offered his arm. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His arm was solid, warm, and for the briefest instant, she felt the pulse of something human between them. The gala was held at the Grand Seattle Hotel Crystal Chandeliers. 1,000 candles, a sea of expensive smiles. Cameras flashed as they entered, the crowd parting instinctively for Ethan Caldwell. To everyone else, they looked like the perfect couple, the powerful husband, the graceful wife. But beneath the polished surface lay the same distance as ever, invisible but heavy, like glass between them. Ethan guided her through introductions, business partners, investors, donors. She smiled when expected, her voice steady. He kept a hand at the small of her back, firm but careful, as though reminding both of them that this was an arrangement, not affection. Still, something about the night felt different. Perhaps it was the music, soft jazz drifting from the orchestra, or perhaps it was the way people looked at them admiring, unaware of the cracks beneath the surface. For a while, she almost forgot where she was, until she heard her name. Claire. She turned. A tall man stood a few feet away, holding a glass of wine and wearing a smile that reached his eyes. "Daniel Brooks," he said quickly. "It's been years." Her face lit up in surprise. "Daniel. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it." They embraced without thinking. The scent of cologne and nostalgia filled the air. Daniel had been her classmate in college, kind, witty, a fellow art lover who had once walked her home through Boston winters. He had been her friend when life was still gentle. "I heard you moved to Seattle," he said, pulling back, "and married a man named Caldwell. I should have guessed it was the Ethan Caldwell." At the mention of his name, Claire turned instinctively. Ethan stood a few feet away, expression unreadable. His eyes were dark, focused, like a storm waiting for wind. Daniel extended a hand. "It's an honor. Mr. Caldwell." Claire's spoken. Ethan shook his hand briefly. "Has she—" There was no smile, only ice. "Actually, we were just catching up," Daniel said lightly, oblivious to the undercurrent. "Claire and I used to spend hours arguing about impressionism versus realism." Claire laughed softly. "He always won." Ethan's gaze lingered on her laugh. The sound of it so rare, so unguarded, stabbed something deep inside him. He interrupted, voice low. "Would you like to dance?" It wasn't a question. The orchestra began a slow waltz. Ethan led her onto the dance floor. His hand pressed lightly against her back. Her other hand rested on his shoulder. They moved in time with the music, graceful, deliberate, to the crowd. They were elegance itself. But beneath the rhythm, tension thrummed. "You seem happy to see him," Ethan said, tone deceptively calm. "He's an old friend," she replied. "That's all. Old friends don't look at you that way." Her eyes narrowed. "And husbands don't own their wives." The words landed between them like broken glass. He tightened his grip, not painfully, but enough for her to feel it. Careful, Claire. Of what she whispered, of telling the truth. For a moment, they stopped moving. The orchestra continued, but the air between them was electric, charged with everything unsaid. Then Ethan exhaled sharply and resumed the dance. His movements clipped, precise. She followed, her heart pounding, anger and confusion tangled together. When the song ended, she stepped back first, lowering her gaze. The applause of the crowd sounded distant, meaningless. Ethan leaned close, voice tight. "We're leaving. The event isn't over. It is for us." He didn't wait for her answer. He took her hand firm, possessive, and led her through the crowd. Heads turned as they passed. No one spoke. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, cold and thin. Their driver rushed to open the door, but Ethan didn't speak until they were inside the car. Neither did she. The silence between them was louder than the storm. Back at the mansion, he opened the door for her, but his jaw was locked, his eyes shadowed. She stepped inside first. The marble floors reflected their distorted reflections. "Don't ever embarrass me like that again," he said finally, voice low. "Embarrass you." Her voice trembled not from fear, but fury. For talking to an old friend, for letting him touch you. She laughed bitterly. "You don't get to dictate who I am. Ethan, you don't own me." He took a step closer, anger and something else flickering in his eyes. "Don't I?" For one breath. Neither moved. Then he turned sharply and walked away, leaving her in the echo of her own heartbeat. She stood there, trembling, staring at the door he'd slammed behind him. Outside, the storm raged against the glass walls. Inside, another had just begun. The house was silent when they returned from the gala, the kind of silence that vibrated beneath the skin. Rain still tapped against the glass walls, and thunder rolled over the lake like a warning. Martha had gone to bed hours ago. Only the low light from the foyer chandelier remained pale, gold, trembling. Claire stepped inside first, the hem of her emerald dress brushing the marble floor. Her heels clicked once, then stopped. Ethan followed, closing the door with quiet precision. The sound of it echoed like a gunshot. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, his breathing uneven, his hands clenched at his sides. The storm outside threw shards of lightning across his face. Finally, she turned to him. "Are you going to say something?" He met her eyes. "You embarrassed me." She laughed softly, not out of amusement, but disbelief. "Because I danced with an old friend, because you let him touch you." Her voice rose, sharp and clear. "Touch me. It was a dance. Ethan, a dance. That's what people do when they're not afraid to be human." His jaw tightened. "You think this is about fear?" "No," she shot back. "It's about control. You need everyone to bend to your will. You can own companies. You can own buildings. But you can't own me." Her words hit him like glass breaking. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. The thunder outside swallowed the silence between them. Then, in a voice low and rough, he said, "You have no idea what you've done to me." Claire frowned, taken aback. "What I've done to you?" Ethan took a step closer. His restraint, the careful armor he'd worn for years, began to crack. "You walk through this house like you've lived here forever," he said. "You leave music in every room, laughter in corners that haven't heard a sound in years. You've invaded every quiet part of me. Claire, I can't think. I can't work. I can't breathe without you filling my head." His voice trembled, and when I saw him put his hands on you tonight, he stopped, swallowing hard. I wanted to kill him. The admission stunned them both. Claire's heartbeat thudded in her ears. "You're jealous." "Yes," he said hoarsely. "I'm jealous. I'm angry. He broke off, pacing, dragging a hand through his hair. "I don't even know what I am anymore." She stared at him, her anger shifting into something more complicated. "You think jealousy is love?" "No," he said, looking at her again. "Jealousy is proof that I've lost control." He took another step closer. The air between them changed heavy, charged. "I swore this marriage would be punishment," he said quietly. "A lesson. But every day I spend with you, every word you say, every time I hear that piano," his voice faltered, "it feels like you're undoing everything I built to survive." Claire's breath caught. The storm flashed white against the windows, illuminating the space between them, close. Too close. "You wanted revenge," she whispered. "Not this." "I wanted to forget," he said. "Instead, I found you." Something in her broke then the wall she had built since the day she agreed to marry him. For so long, she had seen only the monster in him, the man who used her father's guilt as a weapon. But now she saw the man beneath, damaged, furious, desperate to feel something real. Ethan. Her voice was barely audible, but it pulled him forward like gravity. He stopped just inches away, his breath mingling with hers. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. She didn't. The first touch was cautious, his hand brushing her cheek, the warmth of his skin startling after so many cold nights. She closed her eyes, torn between fear and longing. "Why are you doing this?" she breathed. "Because I can't not," he said. "Because every time I look at you, I forget why I hate your name." And then he kissed her. It wasn't the polite, practiced gesture from their wedding day. This was something raw, born of fury and desire, grief and need. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her face toward him. The world outside vanished. There was only the sound of rain against glass and the ragged rhythm of their breathing. For a moment, she resisted. Then the resistance shattered. Her fingers found his shoulders, clutching, pulling him closer. All the loneliness, the guilt, the sleepless nights, everything they had buried erupted between them. The kiss deepened, fierce and trembling, until they both had to break apart just to breathe. Ethan's forehead rested against hers. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "Probably," she said. He laughed once, quiet, broken, and kissed her again, this time slower, deliberate. Her hands trembled as she touched his face. "You said you'd never touch me," she whispered. "I lied." She drew a sharp breath. "Why? Because I thought I could hate you enough to forget you. I was wrong." Another crash of thunder rolled across the lake. Somewhere in the house, a picture frame fell from the wall, but neither of them noticed. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. The emerald silk of her dress caught the light as he carried her up the staircase, not toward her room, but toward his. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. Later, long after the storm outside had quieted, the rain still traced its rhythm against the glass. In the faint light, two figures lay together, not in peace, not yet, but in something that felt dangerously close. Claire stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning between guilt and wonder. "What happens now?" she whispered. Ethan turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know." Neither did she. All she knew was that the distance between them was gone, replaced by something neither of them understood, something that frightened her as much as it drew her in. She turned onto her side, closing her eyes, the sound of the rain lulling her toward sleep. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel entirely empty. Morning light came softly through the glass walls, golden and forgiving. The lake outside lay still, rippling only where ducks moved through the mist. For the first time in months, the Caldwell mansion didn't feel like a monument to silence. It felt almost alive. Claire woke to the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. She reached across the bed instinctively, half expecting the space beside her to be empty. But Ethan was still there, sitting upright, tie in hand, studying her with an expression that hovered somewhere between wonder and disbelief. "You're awake," he said softly. She smiled sleepily. "You're still here?" He hesitated. "I thought I'd make breakfast." She blinked. "You cook." "Don't sound so surprised," he said, the faintest grin tugging at his mouth. "I can handle scrambled eggs and coffee. Beyond that, you might have to call the fire department." Claire laughed, a sound that startled them both. It was light, genuine, unguarded. Ethan poured coffee into 2 mugs, watching her with quiet amusement. She wrapped herself in a robe, crossed the room, and took the cup he offered. Their fingers brushed, neither pulled away. It was a small thing, but it felt enormous. The days that followed unfolded like fragile petals after rain. They ate breakfast together in the kitchen instead of opposite ends of the dining hall. He asked about her mother's health, and this time he didn't just listen. He cared. Some mornings, he left later than usual for work. On others, he returned early, claiming he needed fresh air, though everyone in the house knew that wasn't true. He wanted time with her. Claire began painting again. She found a small, unused studio upstairs, sunlight streaming in through tall windows. Martha helped her set it up an easel, brushes, jars of color. The first stroke of paint across canvas felt like a heartbeat returning. Ethan discovered her there one evening. She was standing barefoot, a streak of blue across her wrist, the faintest trace of paint on her cheek. He leaned against the doorframe, smiling slightly. "You're making a mess of my walls." She turned, startled, then smiled back. They needed some life. He watched her for a moment. "You look happy." Her smile faltered just a little. "I'm trying to be." Something in her tone made him pause. He wanted to ask what she meant, but instead he crossed the room and took the brush from her hand, examining it as if it were something sacred. "Do you miss Boston?" he asked. "Yes," she said honestly. "But I think I miss who I was there more than the place itself." He nodded, thoughtful. Maybe she's still here, just learning to breathe again. She met his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't see the man who had taken everything from her. She saw the one who was slowly, painfully, trying to give something back. Martha noticed the change before anyone else. The sound of laughter in the mornings, the way the piano played lighter melodies now, the way Ethan lingered at the kitchen doorway longer than he needed to, just to watch Claire talk. She had seen many versions of Ethan Caldwell, the ambitious son, the grieving heir, the ruthless businessman, but this one was different, softer, human. Still, she worried. One afternoon, she found him in his study, staring out at the rain. Papers covered his desk, legal documents, financial reports, a folder marked Whitmore Holdings. He closed it quickly when she entered, but not before she saw the name. She folded her arms. "That woman is bringing this house back to life," she said. "You'd better make sure you don't kill it again." Ethan didn't turn. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about truth, Mr. Caldwell." Martha's tone was kind but firm. "Whatever you're hiding, whatever you started this marriage for, it won't stay hidden forever." His shoulders tensed. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand plenty." She stepped closer. "I've watched you since you were a boy. I watched grief turn your heart into armor, but love built on lies can't stand." "Ethan," "Not for long." He looked at her, eyes hard. "You think I don't know that? Then stop pretending revenge and love can live in the same house." Her words landed with the weight of truth. He didn't answer. When she left, he stood there a long while, staring at the rain tracing paths down the glass. That evening, Claire painted by the window again. The storm outside had quieted to a drizzle. Ethan came in, loosened his tie, and sat beside her. "What are you working on?" he asked. She showed him the canvas, a landscape, soft strokes of green and gray. "It's the view from your window," she said, "except with more light." He tilted his head, thoughtful. "You've made it look peaceful." She smiled. "Maybe I'm painting what I want to see." He studied her face. "Do you regret any of it?" She paused, brush hovering mid-air. "Regret marrying you?" He nodded, though his voice was almost a whisper. Claire set the brush down carefully. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but not for the reasons you think." Ethan frowned. "What reasons?" Then she turned to him. "Because I hate what brought us here. The lies, the hurt. But I don't hate this us. Right now, that's what confuses me." Her words struck him like light breaking through fog. He looked down at his hands, at the faint streak of blue paint she'd left when she brushed against him earlier. He wanted to tell her everything, about her father, about how all of this had started. But the fear of losing what little they had built rooted him to silence. Instead, he reached for her hand. She let him hold it. Neither spoke. The quiet between them was gentle this time. Not a void, but a pause in which something fragile could grow. That night, Claire played the piano again. Not a sorrowful tune this time, but something tender, half lullaby, half promise. Ethan listened from the doorway, as always, but when she looked up, he didn't hide. He came closer, sat beside her, and added his hand over hers, pressing one note on the final chord. The sound lingered soft, steady, whole. "See," she said with a small smile, "you can make music after all." He chuckled quietly. "Only when you're here." But later, when she slept, he sat alone in his study, staring at the folder he had hidden from her. Inside was the final stage of his plan, the financial trap that would finish Robert Whitmore once and for all. The signatures were ready, the press conference scheduled. All he had to do was sign. He closed the folder instead. For the first time in 15 years, his hand refused to move. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying Martha's words back to him like a whisper. "Love built on lies can't stand." Ethan looked toward the stairs, where Claire slept, and whispered to the empty room, "Then I'd better learn to tell the truth, before it's too late." The storm came back to Seattle the same morning the truth arrived. Rain blurred the city skyline, the kind of gray that made glass and sky indistinguishable. Ethan sat in his study, coffee cooling beside a stack of papers. He had been awake since dawn, restless, uneasy, a feeling he hadn't known since his father's death. When the knock came at the door, he already knew who it was. Thomas Chen, his lead investigator, stepped inside, damp coat, briefcase clutched tightly. The man's face carried the gravity of someone who knew his news would change everything. "Mr. Caldwell," Thomas said, voice low. "I found it." Ethan straightened, found what Chen set the briefcase on the desk, and clicked it open. Inside were folders, old receipts, bank statements, legal drafts, all meticulously organized. "Proof," he said, "of what you've suspected all along." He placed the top document in front of Ethan. The Caldwell-Whitmore Partnership, 2007. A line of transactions highlighted in red ink. Transfers to offshore accounts, signed under Thomas Caldwell's name, but traced to Robert Whitmore's authorization code. Chen spoke quietly. "He embezzled company funds, then forged your father's signature. When the audits began, he made it look like your father was the thief. Whitmore took everything, the patents, the clients, the reputation, and left Thomas to take the fall." Ethan's breath caught, slow and deliberate. He had always believed it, but believing and seeing were not the same. Each page was another wound reopening. His father's handwriting elegant, proud, appearing beside numbers that weren't his. The final letter from the board dismissing him. The obituary that followed 3 months later. 15 years of rage compressed into a single, suffocating silence. Ethan closed the folder. His voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of thunder. "So it's true." Chen nodded. "Every bit of it. Then it's time." Ethan said. "Time for what?" Sir Ethan rose, his eyes hard. "To finish what I started. I want every file sent to my attorney. I'll call a press conference tomorrow. By noon, the world will know what Robert Whitmore did." Chen hesitated. "And Mrs. Caldwell." Ethan froze. "She's not involved, but she's his daughter," Chen said carefully. "You're exposing her family." Ethan turned sharply. "She made her choice when she married me." The bitterness in his own voice startled even him. He saw the flicker of discomfort in Chen's expression, but didn't care. "Do as I say," he said. Cold again. The softness of recent weeks gone. Chen nodded silently, gathered his things, and left. When the door shut, the only sound was the ticking of the clock and the steady patter of rain. Ethan stood there, hands braced on the desk, breathing hard. The peace he had built with Claire now felt like a fragile illusion, one good gust of truth away from collapse. But justice, he told himself, mattered more. It always had. He poured himself a drink. The whiskey burned down his throat like fire, steadying his trembling hands. Then he said it aloud, to the empty room, as if his father could still hear him. "I'll destroy the Whitmore name, every piece of it." He didn't hear her enter. Claire stood in the doorway, barefoot, hair damp from the rain. She had come to tell him dinner was ready. But the look on his face, the fury, the cold triumph froze her in place. "What did you just say?" she asked. Ethan turned, startled. He hadn't realized she was there. "Claire. What name are you going to destroy?" Her gaze dropped to the open briefcase. She crossed the room slowly, her eyes scanning the papers. Her father's name, her family's company, the forged signatures, and suddenly she understood. "This is what it was all for," she whispered. "Me, us, everything." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "You don't understand? I understand perfectly." Her voice cracked, sharp with disbelief. "You married me to get to him. All this time, every word, every touch, it was all part of your revenge." "That's not true," he said quickly. "Not anymore." She laughed, a small, broken sound. "Not anymore." So it was true once Ethan took a step forward. "Claire, listen to me." "No." Her hands were shaking now. "You used me, Ethan. You used my father's guilt, my mother's illness, me to settle your score." He tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he said. "I didn't plan to feel what pity." She spat. "You told me once this marriage was punishment. You were right. I just never realized who was being punished." "Claire, please don't." Her voice softened, but the words hurt more for it. "You talk about justice, but all you've done is become the man you hate." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "You think destroying him will bring your father back? It won't. You're destroying yourself instead." Ethan's throat tightened. "You don't know what he did." "I don't care," she said fiercely. "I care what you've done." The rain outside beat harder against the windows, thunder echoing through the house. Ethan looked at her, this woman who had somehow become his compass, and saw nothing but the wreckage of what he'd built. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he loved her, that she had changed everything, but the words refused to come. Pride still chained him. Claire waited. The silence between them stretched, suffocating. Finally, she nodded slowly, as if she'd received her answer. "I see," she whispered. "Then there's nothing left to say." She slipped the wedding ring from her finger, the thin gold band that had once felt like a chain and now felt like a wound. She set it gently on his desk, beside the open folder marked Whitmore. The sound it made when it touched the wood was small but final. "Goodbye, Ethan." He reached out instinctively. "Claire, don't." But she was already walking away. Through the hall, down the marble staircase, out into the rain. The door closed softly behind her. Ethan stood motionless, the echo of her voice still hanging in the air. Then, slowly, he looked down at the ring on his desk. It gleamed beside the evidence that had cost him everything. For the first time in 15 years, Ethan Caldwell felt what true loss really meant. The mansion was silent again, not the peaceful kind of silence that followed music, but the hollow kind that came after loss. Days passed, though Ethan barely registered them. The house felt larger now, emptier, echoing with absence. The piano room stayed dark. The faint smell of her perfume still lingered in the hall, fading a little more each morning. He hadn't moved the ring. It still sat on his desk, beside the folder marked Whitmore Holdings, a glint of gold against the cold mahogany. Every time he passed it, he heard her voice again. "You've become the man you hate." Those words looped in his head like a curse. He couldn't sleep. When he did, he dreamed her face, her eyes when she said goodbye, his father's coffin beneath a gray Seattle sky. Sometimes he woke gasping, reaching for someone who wasn't there. Leonard, his assistant, tried to maintain their schedule, calls, meetings, interviews. Ethan canceled them all. Even Thomas Chen came by once, anxious about the press conference. "It's scheduled for tomorrow," Chen reminded him. "Reporters are expecting you. Once this goes public, Robert Whitmore's finished." Ethan stared at him for a long time before answering. Leave the documents here, he said quietly. I'll decide by morning. Chen hesitated. Sir, this is what you've worked for. Ethan's expression didn't change. Exactly. When Chen left, Ethan poured a drink he didn't want and sat by the window. Rain slid down the glass, tracing the same slow paths it always had. Outside, the lake reflected only darkness. Inside, the reflection staring back at him was worse. He thought of the night she'd walked away, her voice trembling but strong. You think destroying him will bring your father back? It won't. For 15 years, he'd told himself revenge would heal him, but all it had done was make him a mirror of the man he despised. He looked down at his father's watch, still ticking faintly on his wrist. It was the only thing Thomas Caldwell had left him besides the memory of his voice. And tonight, that voice returned. It was a memory so vivid it stole his breath. He was 17 again, standing beside his father at a construction site, rain soaking through their jackets. The steel skeleton of a new building rose behind them, unfinished, imperfect, beautiful in its incompleteness. Anger is easy. Ethan, his father had said, kneeling to meet his eyes, anyone can destroy. But building something that lasts, that takes patience and love. He had smiled, a tired but gentle smile. Someday, people will hurt you. Don't let it make you small. Don't let it make you cruel. The memory blurred, replaced by the image of a gravestone and the boy who had sworn vengeance over it. Ethan closed his eyes. His father's words felt like salt in an open wound. He whispered into the quiet room, I'm sorry, Dad. At dawn, he called Leonard. Cancel the press conference. Sir Leonard's voice crackled over the line. You're sure? Yes. And call my attorney. Tell him to transfer all the evidence to the district attorney's office. No press, no statements. Just let the law handle it. There was a pause. What should I tell the media? Tell them nothing, Ethan said. For once, I'd rather not be seen. He hung up before Leonard could reply. The decision didn't bring peace, not immediately. But for the first time, it didn't bring pain either. It felt quiet, heavy, but right. That afternoon, Martha knocked softly on the study door. She entered without waiting for permission, carrying a cup of tea. Her eyes were kind but sharp, reading the exhaustion in his face. You look like a man who hasn't slept in a week, she said. Maybe I haven't. She set the tea down, and the young Mrs. Caldwell Ethan looked away. Gone. Martha nodded slowly. Then maybe now you can see what you've done. He met her gaze, but there was no anger left in him. I already do. She studied him a moment longer. Then fix it, whatever that means for you. Fix it before it's too late. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. Your father would have liked her, she said softly, and he'd be proud you canceled that circus you were planning. When she was gone, Ethan sat in silence, the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. By evening, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, washed of something old. He went for a walk along the edge of the lake. The water reflected streaks of fading pink from the sunset. The path was lined with the same cedar trees his father had once loved. He stopped near the bench where Thomas used to sit during design breaks. The memory hit him again, his father sketching on a napkin, smiling, saying, buildings, people, love, they all need foundations. Sun, otherwise, they collapse. Ethan sank onto the bench, elbows on his knees, and let out a long breath he'd been holding for years. The empire he had built now felt meaningless without her in it. But maybe, just maybe, it could become something else, something his father wouldn't be ashamed of. He pulled out his phone and made a new call, not to a lawyer or an investor this time, but to a therapist. The number had been sitting in his contacts for weeks, given to him by Martha long ago. He had ignored it until now. Dr. Harris, he said, when the voice answered. "This is Ethan Caldwell. I think it's time we talked." That night, he sat by the piano, the one Claire had brought back to life. His fingers brushed a single key. The note was soft, almost a whisper. He let it linger, then another, and another, a clumsy melody, but his own. In the corner of the room, the moonlight touched the edge of the painting she'd left unfinished, the view from his window, but painted brighter, as if she'd believed light could reach even him. He smiled faintly, tiredly. "Maybe it still can," he murmured. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, sleep came without dreams of anger. 3 months had passed since Claire left Seattle. 3 months since she'd walked out of that mansion of glass and silence, leaving behind the man she had loved and feared in equal measure. Now, she lived by the sea. The town of Astoria, Oregon, wasn't much more than a cluster of streets and a dock lined with fishing boats. The air always smelled of salt and cedar, and the cries of gulls carried through the fog like unanswered prayers. It was small, quiet, honest. Everything her old life had not been. She rented a tiny apartment above a bookstore that smelled of paper and ocean wind. Below, the owner's cat, Mr. Hobbs, liked to sleep in the window display beside a stack of poetry collections. Upstairs, her windows looked out on the water. Each morning, the sun rose in slow gold streaks, and she watched it with a cup of tea held close between her palms, pretending the warmth might last all day. She had taken a job at a small art gallery near the shore, the kind of place tourists wandered into on rainy afternoons, where local painters displayed seascapes and driftwood sculptures. Claire managed sales, curated displays, and swept sand from the floors after storms. She liked the rhythm of it, ordinary, unremarkable. No reporters, no luxury cars waiting at the door, no walls made of glass, just the sound of waves and time. Her co-workers adored her gentle eye for color, the way she could hang a painting just so that it caught the afternoon light. They didn't ask much about her past, and she didn't offer. She had learned to smile without explanation. Some nights, when the tide was low, she walked along the beach barefoot, letting the cold water lap at her feet. The ocean was constant but unpredictable calm one day, wild the next. It reminded her of love, of Ethan. The thought still hurt, though the pain had dulled to something quieter, a lingering ache rather than a wound. He had destroyed her trust, but not her compassion. She still wondered if he'd changed, if the man she'd glimpsed beneath the anger had survived the storm she'd left behind. Then she would shake the thought away and listen to the sea instead. On a gray Tuesday morning, a customer brought in a collection of old frames for consignment. As Claire unpacked them, she found one holding a photograph of a half-finished building glass and steel catching the sky. Her breath caught the Caldwell Tower. For a moment, she stood frozen, staring at it, heart pounding. Then she turned the picture face down and slipped it into the back room. That night, she dreamed of him, not the man who had threatened and controlled, but the one who had stood beside her as she painted, quiet and thoughtful, asking about light and color, as if both mattered. She woke before dawn, tears drying on her cheeks. Weeks passed. The gallery grew busier with summer travelers. Children laughed on the beach. The scent of grilled fish filled the air at night. And slowly, Claire began to breathe again. She painted in the evenings now, small canvases of the sea, of rain, of memory. She sold one to a tourist couple who said it felt like peace. She smiled, thanking them, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. Because peace, she had learned, wasn't silence. It was acceptance. And she was still learning how to accept. Then one morning, while rearranging a new shipment of paintings, she felt dizzy. The room tilted slightly, colors blurring around the edges. She steadied herself on the counter, closing her eyes until the world stopped spinning. Claire called her co-worker. "Ellie, you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just skipped breakfast." But later, when the dizziness returned, followed by the sudden, undeniable realization of what it meant. She sat down hard on the edge of the counter, her heart beating so fast it hurt. She went home early, the sound of waves chasing her footsteps. In her tiny bathroom, she stared at the test in her hand until the blue lines blurred. 2 lines, clear, certain, unmistakable, pregnant. For a long time, she couldn't move. The sea roared outside her window, the tide coming in strong. Her first thought was disbelief, then fear, then slowly, unexpectedly something like awe. She pressed a hand to her stomach, barely breathing. Inside her, a heartbeat she couldn't yet hear had begun to exist. The father's face flashed through her mind. Ethan, standing by the window that night, lightning behind him, eyes full of sorrow and longing. The man who had broken her heart and yet, somehow, had awakened it too. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered. That night, she sat on the small balcony overlooking the sea. A storm had gathered again, clouds bruised and heavy, wind stirring the waves into white foam. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and watched the horizon fade into gray. In her lap lay a small notebook. She opened it and began to write. "I don't know what kind of future waits for us," she wrote slowly, "but I know this child will be born of something real. Not hate, not revenge. Maybe that's enough to start over, even if we never see each other again." She closed the notebook, holding it to her chest. The baby's existence filled her with both terror and hope. Hope, because it was a new beginning. Fear, because beginnings always came with the risk of endings. But for the first time since leaving Seattle, she didn't feel trapped. She felt steady, grounded. The waves rolled in and out below her balcony, eternal and unbothered. "Maybe that's what love is," she whispered to the sea. "Something that keeps coming back, even after the storm." She closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of the tide, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Outside, the wind softened. The first light of dawn began to shimmer across the horizon, turning the water from steel to silver. And for the first time in months, Claire smiled not because she was free, but because she had survived. The sea mist hung low over the Oregon coast that afternoon, softening everything it touched: the gray rooftops, the narrow streets, the slow, curling waves. Claire was closing the gallery early. The summer tourists had gone home. Autumn had brought quieter days. She turned the sign on the door to closed and reached for her coat when the bell above the entrance chimed once more. "Sorry," she said without looking up. "We're done for today? Then maybe you'll make an exception for me." Her heart stopped. The voice low, familiar, trembling cut through her like wind through glass. She turned slowly. Ethan stood in the doorway, coat damp from the rain, hair disheveled, eyes haunted but alive. For a long, suspended moment, neither moved. He looked older somehow, not in years, but in weight, as if the months had carved something softer, truer into him. "Ethan," she whispered. He nodded once. "Hello? Claire?" The silence that followed was thick, aching, filled with all the words neither of them had known how to say. She took a step back, bracing her hands on the counter. "How did you find me?" "I didn't," he said quietly. "I searched. For months. You didn't leave a trail, no cards, no messages, no calls. I checked every gallery on the coast. When I walked into town this morning, I wasn't sure if I'd find you here or just another ghost." Her voice trembled. "You shouldn't have come. I know," he said, "but I had to." For a long moment, she said nothing. The only sound was the rain pattering softly against the windows. Finally, she asked, "What do you want?" "Ethan," he looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once built an empire and destroyed a marriage, and then met her eyes. "Not forgiveness," he said. "That's too much to ask. I came to tell you I changed, or, at least, I'm trying to." Claire studied him carefully. There was no arrogance now, no anger, just truth, quiet and unguarded. He took a step closer, leaving distance between them, but bridging something unseen. After you left, he began slowly. I canceled everything. The press conference, the revenge, all of it. I gave the evidence to the authorities and walked away. Why, she asked softly. Because you were right, he said, about everything. I was becoming the man I hated, maybe worse. My father used to say that forgiveness was the only way to stop a legacy of pain. I didn't understand that until I lost you. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. He went on. I started therapy. 3 months, twice a week. At first, I told myself it was for appearances. But it wasn't. It was survival. I had to face what I'd done to you, to myself, to the boy who swore over his father's grave that revenge was the only way to love him. He laughed softly, without humor. Turns out, hate isn't love. It's just another kind of prison. Her eyes filled, though she tried to blink the tears away. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know I'm not the same man you left. And because I needed to see you, even if it's just to say goodbye the right way. He started to turn, but she stopped him. Wait. He froze. She took a deep breath, gathering courage. There's something you need to know, too. He turned back, eyes questioning. What is it? Claire hesitated, then stepped from behind the counter. Her hand moved almost unconsciously to her stomach, a small, natural gesture that said everything before she spoke. Ethan's gaze followed it, and realization struck like lightning. His breath caught. She nodded. 3 months? For a long moment, he said nothing. His lips parted, but no sound came. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them, the faint sound of waves. The heartbeat neither could hear, but both could feel. Finally, he whispered. I didn't know. I didn't either, she said. Not when I left. He closed his eyes, a quiet shudder running through him. When he opened them again, there were tears there, not the kind born of weakness, but of awe and guilt and something deeper. He stepped forward slowly, as if afraid the air itself might shatter. Can I? She nodded once. His hand hovered, then rested gently over hers. On the small curve beneath her sweater, the warmth of her skin, the fragile miracle beneath it, undid him completely. His voice broke. Our child. Yes. He dropped his head, his forehead resting lightly against hers. A single tear fell between them. I don't deserve this, he whispered. Maybe not, she said softly, but neither did I deserve what you did before. And yet, here we are. They stood there, silent, the rhythm of their breathing matching the soft crash of waves outside. After a long moment, she pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. What are you going to do now? Ethan exhaled slowly. Whatever you'll allow. If that means walking away again, I'll do it. If it means waiting, I'll wait forever. But if you'll let me try, if you'll let me be part of this child's life, I'll spend every day proving I've changed. She studied his face, the man she had once feared, once loved, and now saw stripped bare of everything but truth. People don't change overnight. I know, he said. That's why I'll keep showing you. The rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the gallery windows in gold. For the first time, she saw him not as the man who had destroyed her world, but as the man who might rebuild it brick by brick, choice by choice. She smiled faintly, tears still glistening. You look different. He gave a soft laugh. Therapy does that. Apparently. I meant your eyes, she said. They're quieter. He looked down, voice thick. That's what happens when you finally stop running. They walked together to the door. Outside, the sea shimmered under the pale light. Ethan turned once more to face her. I'll be staying in town for a few days, he said. No pressure, no expectations. Just, if you decide you want to talk. She nodded. All right. He lingered a moment, then smiled small, uncertain, but real. You look happy here. I'm learning how to be, she said. He opened the door, the bell chiming softly. Before stepping out, He paused. "Claire," he said quietly, "thank you for letting me see what I broke." She blinked back tears. "Thank you for trying to fix it." And with that, he left, walking into the bright, salt-scented air, the sound of the sea following him down the narrow street. Claire stood in the doorway long after he was gone, one hand resting gently over her stomach, feeling the faintest flutter beneath her palm. She smiled through her tears. For the first time, the past didn't feel like a weight. It felt like the soil from which something new might grow. The days after Ethan's return passed like waves, each one different, each one pulling at Claire in ways she didn't fully understand. She saw him sometimes through the gallery window, walking along the pier, talking with locals, helping an old fisherman carry crates from his truck. He never came inside again, not once. He seemed to be waiting without waiting, letting time, not words, make his case, and that, somehow, unsettled her more than his presence ever had before. She wasn't used to this version of him, quiet, patient, unguarded. It made her heart ache in places she thought had gone numb. One evening, Ellie, her co-worker, found her staring out at the sea after closing time. "You've been somewhere else all week," Ellie teased gently. "Everything okay?" Claire hesitated. "I don't know. Whoever he is," Ellie said, smiling, "he's got you thinking pretty hard." Claire laughed softly. "He's my husband." Ellie blinked. "Oh. Well, that explains the look." Claire smiled faintly. What look the one people wear when they're trying to decide if love is worth another heartbreak? She didn't answer, because that was exactly what it was. That night, Claire walked along the coastline, the air crisp with salt and mist. The sea was restless, waves hissing against the rocks. Her coat billowed around her as she followed the path that curved past the lighthouse and disappeared into the dunes. Each step echoed with memory of the mansion's glass floors, of the man who'd once whispered love between apologies and lies, of the moment she'd left, ring clinking against his desk. She pressed a hand to her stomach, the small life growing quietly inside her, and wondered what kind of world she wanted for this child. One built on fear and regret, or one where forgiveness could mean something real. Her father's voice haunted her, still broken, regretful, pleading for her help. Her mother's laughter before the illness, and Ethan's words, trembling in the gallery days ago, "I'll spend every day proving I've changed." She wanted to believe him. God, she did. But trust wasn't something you could rebuild with promises. It needed time and evidence. As the tide crept higher, she whispered to the wind, "How do you forgive someone who broke you trying to heal themselves?" The sea gave no answer. Only the steady rhythm of waves, the same rhythm that had once comforted her. Perhaps that was the answer. You didn't forgive all at once. You did it the way the tide returned, slowly, faithfully, 1 inch at a time. The next morning, she found him outside her building. He wasn't waiting, not exactly. He was crouched by her porch, repairing the door hinge that had been loose for weeks. A small toolbox sat beside him. When he looked up, he smiled awkwardly. It kept sticking. Figured I'd fix it before winter. She folded her arms. "You didn't have to do that. I know." He tightened one last screw and stood. That's kind of the point. There was no grand speech, no plea for attention, just a man doing something quietly right. She studied him for a long moment. His clothes were damp from the ocean air, his hands rough, his face thinner but calmer. The Ethan she'd known before would have sent someone else to fix the door. This one did it himself. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, giving a small smile before stepping back. "I brought something else, too." From his coat pocket, he pulled a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a tin of tea. English rose blend, her mother's favorite. Claire's throat tightened. "How did you, Martha?" he said quietly. "She told me what your mother used to drink, said it might bring back good memories." She held the tin gently, blinking back tears. "You remembered her. I remember everything that matters," he said. They walked together down to the beach. The wind whipped around them, cold but clean. Neither spoke for a while. The sea stretched wide and endless, the sound of it filling the spaces words couldn't reach. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Why did you really come back?" Ethan stopped, staring at the horizon. "Because I realized I'd spent half my life building towers to prove I wasn't broken. But none of it meant anything if I couldn't look you in the eye and say I was sorry." She looked at him, her eyes soft but cautious. "And the other half?" He smiled faintly. "Trying to learn how not to destroy the things I love." The honesty in his tone made her chest ache. She turned her gaze back to the sea. "You know, I used to think love was supposed to fix people." "It doesn't," he said quietly. "It just gives us a reason to want to." That made her laugh quietly, sadly. "You sound like someone else now." He looked at her. "Maybe I finally am." They reached the edge of the pier. The wind was stronger there, waves crashing below. Ethan turned to face her. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he sank to one knee, not like a man proposing, but like someone laying down the last of his pride. "I don't deserve another chance," he said. "I know that, but I'll spend my life earning it. Not by asking for forgiveness, but by being someone worthy of it. For you, for our child, for the man my father wanted me to become." The tears came before she could stop them. She covered her mouth with one hand, trying to steady her breathing. Ethan looked up, eyes filled with quiet certainty. "I won't ask you to come home. You don't owe me that. I just wanted you to know that I'm not leaving again, not until you tell me there's truly no hope left." Claire lowered her hand, her voice trembling. "You really mean that I've never meant anything more?" The waves struck the pier below them, scattering salt into the air. The sky had begun to clear, streaks of pale sunlight cutting through the clouds. Claire stepped closer, kneeling down to meet him. She reached for his face, brushing away a tear that had escaped down his cheek. "You're not the man I married," she whispered. He flinched slightly. "I know." She shook her head. "That's a good thing?" Their eyes held for a long, breathless moment. Then she said, "I'm not ready to forgive you yet, but I'm not ready to say goodbye, either." Ethan's lips curved into a faint, trembling smile. "Then I can live with that?" They stood together, side by side, watching the sea crash and shimmer before them. The wind tangled her hair around his sleeve. His hand found hers, tentative but steady. For the first time, it didn't feel like possession. It felt like beginning. Spring came early that year on the Oregon coast. The air smelled of wildflowers and salt, and the garden behind the renovated Whitmore home had finally come alive. Again, tulips pushing through damp soil, ivy curling up the old fence, sunlight flickering through the branches like a blessing. It had taken months, but the house that once carried the weight of sorrow now breathed again. Ethan had overseen every repair himself, not as a builder reclaiming land, but as a man rebuilding what he had broken. And today, that house stood witness to a beginning that neither of them could have imagined when their story first began. The ceremony was small. Just a few friends from the gallery, the neighbors, and Martha, who had traveled from Seattle to stand in the front row. Evelyn Whitmore sat in a chair near the lilac bushes, wrapped in a soft shawl, her face pale but glowing. The illness had slowed her body, but not her spirit. When she saw Claire step into the garden, her eyes filled with quiet pride. Claire wore a simple ivory dress, no veil, no diamonds, no grandeur, just lace at the sleeves and wildflowers in her hair. Ethan waited for her beneath an archway of cedar and roses he'd built himself. His suit was modest, his hands slightly trembling. When their eyes met, time seemed to stop. Gone were the ghosts of anger and betrayal. What remained was the stillness of two people who had already walked through the storm and chosen to stand together in the calm that followed. The minister's words were gentle, almost unnecessary. Everyone there already knew what this moment meant. "Ethan and Claire," he said, "today isn't about promises made in ignorance, but but about vows renewed with understanding. You have seen the worst of each other and still chosen love. That is not weakness. That is grace. Ethan reached for Claire's hands. His voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of years. "The first time I made vows," he said, "I did it out of pride. I wanted to own, to punish, to prove something to ghosts. But this time, I come with nothing but gratitude. You taught me that love isn't about control. It's about surrender to truth, to forgiveness, to hope. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise I'll never stop learning how to be worthy of you." Claire's eyes shimmered. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly in his. "The first time, I said I do because I had no choice," she said softly. "Today, I say it because I choose you. Not the man you were, but the man you've become, and the one I see you trying to be every day. You showed me that even broken things can be rebuilt, and that love doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. There was no music, only the soft hum of the sea beyond the garden walls and the faint breeze stirring the flowers. When they exchanged rings, plain gold bands this time, simple and enduring, even the birds seemed to pause their song. "You may seal your vows," the minister said. Ethan brushed a tear from her cheek and kissed her gently, not with passion, but with reverence. It was the kind of kiss that carried every word they no longer needed to say. Martha pressed a handkerchief to her eyes, shaking her head with a watery smile. "About time," she whispered. Evelyn laughed weakly beside her, the sound soft but full of life. "I always knew he'd come around." When the ceremony ended, the guests gathered for tea and lemon cake under the oak tree. Children from the neighborhood played in the yard, their laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. Claire leaned against Ethan's shoulder, her hand resting on her rounded belly. "She's kicking again," she murmured. Ethan smiled, covering her hand with his. "Guess she's impatient, like her mother, or stubborn, like her father." They both laughed, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a joke at someone's expense, just shared history turned into gentle memory. 2 months later, their daughter, Grace Evelyn Caldwell, was born on a bright June morning. She came into the world crying fiercely, her tiny fists clenched, her hair dark as her father's. Ethan held her first, his hands, once used to sign contracts and destroy reputations, now trembled as they cradled something infinitely more fragile. Martha stood by the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Would you look at that?" she whispered. "The man who built towers holding the smallest miracle on earth." Claire, pale but radiant, smiled from the hospital bed. "You should see his face. He's terrified." "I am," Ethan admitted softly, unable to take his eyes off the child. "She's perfect." He sat beside Claire, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. "I used to think strength meant control," he said quietly. "But holding her, I realize it means gentleness. She's going to teach me more than any business ever did." Claire reached up and touched his cheek. "You've already learned the hardest part, letting go." He looked at her then, eyes full of tears he didn't bother to hide. "You gave me back my life, Claire, both of you." She smiled faintly. "No, you just finally learned how to live it." When they brought Grace home, the garden was in full bloom again. The lilacs Evelyn had planted years ago filled the air with sweetness. Ethan walked slowly through the path, the baby asleep against his chest, the late afternoon light golden on the grass. Martha watched from the porch, her hands clasped together, eyes shimmering. She whispered to herself, "Thomas, you'd be proud of him." He finally built something that lasts. Ethan turned, meeting her gaze, as if he'd heard. He smiled the quiet, peaceful smile of a man who no longer carried ghosts. He joined Claire beneath the cedar arch where they'd said their second vows. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and together they looked out toward the horizon, where the sea met the setting sun. There was no need for words. The past was behind them, not erased, but transformed. The future waited, steady and bright, and in between stood the life they had built fragile, real, and finally whole. The Seattle skyline glowed gold in the late afternoon sun. From the upper terrace of Blackwood Manor, the house that once cast only shadows, laughter now spilled through the open doors. Claire's voice, soft and melodic, drifted from inside as she tried to coax Grace to sleep. The baby's giggles rose in defiance of bedtime, bright as wind chimes in spring. Ethan stood by the railing, watching the city below. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. A familiar image, but not the same man who had once stared out at this view, filled with nothing but hunger and ghosts. This version of him was older, humbler, quieter, and for the first time in his life, at peace. A month earlier, he'd done something no one, not even Claire, expected. He had called Robert Whitmore. The conversation had been long and halting, full of silence that carried decades of damage. But when Ethan hung up, his voice was steady. A week later, Robert arrived at Caldwell Architecture's modest design division, not as a partner, not as a rival, but as an employee, a consultant. It was a position without power or prestige, but with dignity. And for Robert, that was more than he deserved and more than Ethan ever thought he would offer. When Claire heard, she had simply looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You really forgave him," she'd whispered. Ethan had shaken his head gently. "Not for him," he said. "For us," and that was the truth. Forgiveness hadn't come easily. It hadn't come clean. It came slowly, like the tide returning to shore inch by inch, washing over old wounds until they no longer burned. He had spent so long believing vengeance was justice. Now he knew that real justice was letting go. The evening light deepened. Inside, Claire finally emerged from Grace's nursery, a faint smile on her lips, a few wisps of hair loose around her face. "She's finally asleep," she said softly. Ethan turned toward her. "That's a miracle. She gets that stubbornness from you." He laughed quietly, reaching for her hand as she joined him at the railing. "And her heart from you." They stood together watching the horizon. The city stretched below them, alive and shimmering. The air smelled of magnolia from the garden, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a piano, someone in the neighborhood practicing with hesitant grace. Claire leaned into his shoulder, and for a while, neither spoke. When she finally did, her voice was almost a whisper. "Do you ever think about who we were back then?" He nodded. "Every day." "And you're not angry anymore?" He took a slow breath. "I was angry for so long I didn't know who I was without it. But now, I think I finally do." She looked up at him, eyes curious. "Who are you then?" He smiled faintly. "A man learning to build, not destroy." As the sun lowered behind the mountains, the glass walls of the house caught the light. The same walls that once felt like a prison now reflected warmth. The rooms glowed in soft gold, the air filled with traces of paint and laughter and life. Martha still visited on weekends. She claimed it was to check the place for dust, but everyone knew she just liked holding Grace. Evelyn, fragile but recovering, had moved into a small cottage nearby. Some afternoons she came by to read to her granddaughter, her laughter echoing through the halls like old music returning. And Ethan, the man who once measured success by conquest, now measured it by moments. A tiny hand wrapped around his finger. A quiet dinner with Claire in the garden. The feeling of peace that no fortune could ever buy. He thought often of his father. Thomas Caldwell had believed that architecture was about balance, not just in structures, but in life. "Every building tells a story," he used to say. "The question is, what kind of story do you want yours to tell?" Ethan looked around now at the home that had been born from vengeance and reborn from grace and smiled. His father would have been proud, not of his wealth or reputation, but of this: the courage to forgive, the humility to rebuild, the faith to love again. He whispered to the wind, as though his father might still be listening, "I finally understand. Dad, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freedom. Inside." Claire's laughter floated from the kitchen. She was humming softly, tidying up the day's small chaos. Ethan turned from the sunset and walked back inside. Grace stirred in her crib, letting out a soft whimper. He lifted her gently, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The tiny child sighed, settling back into sleep, her small hand curling against his chest. In that moment, holding his daughter, surrounded by the warmth of his family, Ethan realized something simple and profound. This was the life he'd been chasing all along. He'd just been running in the wrong direction. Later, when the last of the light faded, he stood once more at the window, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars below. Claire joined him, sliding an arm around his waist. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. He looked at her, at the reflection of the three of them, husband, wife, child, framed in the glass where once he had stood alone. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that every wall I built to keep the world out ended up keeping love out too. But now," he gestured toward the glowing house behind them, "now it's full of music, full of life." Claire smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Full of light." Ethan nodded. "Exactly." He drew her close, the faint scent of lilac clinging to her hair, and together they watched as night settled over the city, gentle, forgiving, infinite. The laughter of their daughter echoed faintly down the hall, blending with the rustle of the evening breeze through the open doors. Ethan closed his eyes and breathed it in, the peace, the sound, the light, and he knew, without question, that his father was right. Some things are built not with steel and stone, but with love and forgiveness. The house once built for revenge now echoed with laughter, and that was his redemption. Sometimes life gives us more reasons to hate than to love. We lose people, we're betrayed, and our hearts harden to protect what's left. But Ethan and Claire's story reminds us that revenge never heals pain. It only keeps the wound open. Forgiveness is not weakness. It's strength in its purest form. It means choosing peace over pride, compassion over control. When Ethan learned to forgive the man who ruined his family, he wasn't excusing the past, he was freeing himself from it. And when Claire found the courage to love again, she taught us that healing begins the moment we stop living inside our anger. In the end, life is not measured by what we conquer, but by what we restore. Every broken relationship, every scar, carries a chance to build something better if we dare to face it with humility and grace. So, if your heart has ever been hurt or hardened, remember, this forgiveness is not the end of justice, it's the beginning of freedom. Thank you, dear friends, for spending this time with Shining Stories. If Ethan and Claire's journey touched your heart, if it reminded you that love, forgiveness, and second chances still matter, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing stories that warm the soul and remind us that even after the darkest nights, there is always light waiting to return. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep your heart shining.